My name is Sarah Mitchell. I am 34 years old, and I'm a decorated Army veteran who served 3 tours in Afghanistan before becoming the Regional Director of Veterans Affairs for the entire Pacific Northwest. This is the story of how my sister stole my fiancé, so I married her ex, and now she's homeless and begging for my help. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. 6 months ago, I was living what most people would consider the American dream. After 8 years of military service, including leading convoy security operations, and earning 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart, I had successfully transitioned into civilian leadership. My position overseeing veteran services across Washington, Oregon, and Northern California meant I managed a budget of over $50 million annually and supervised programs that affected the lives of nearly 200,000 veterans and their families. Irony wasn't lost on me that while I spent my days helping other veterans rebuild their lives after service, my own personal life was about to be completely destroyed by the person I trusted most in the world. My sister Emma had always been the golden child in our family. 3 years younger than me, she had taken a completely different path while I was overseas serving my country. Where I chose duty and sacrifice, Emma chose comfort and convenience. While I was dodging IEDs in Kandahar, she was getting her communications degree from a private college that our parents paid for in full. The contrast between us couldn't have been more stark, and it had been that way since childhood. I was the responsible one, the one who helped Dad fix the car and made sure Mom didn't worry when bills were tight. Emma was the one who got new clothes for school while I wore hand-me-downs, the one who got piano lessons while I worked part-time jobs to save for college. When I announced I was joining the Army, our mother cried for weeks. When Emma announced she was majoring in public relations, our parents threw her a celebration dinner. But despite all of this, I genuinely loved my sister. During my deployments, her letters and care packages kept me grounded. She would write about her college adventures, her internships, and later, her entry-level job at a marketing firm in Seattle. I would respond with carefully censored stories about life on base, always focusing on the positive aspects, never wanting her to worry about the dangers I faced daily. When I came home on leave, we would spend hours catching up, and she seemed genuinely proud of my service and accomplishments. It was during one of these visits home, in fact, that I first met David Chen. I had been back from my second deployment for only 2 weeks when Emma insisted on dragging me to a networking event for young professionals in the city. I wasn't particularly interested in socializing, still adjusting, to civilian crowds and loud spaces, but Emma was persistent. She claimed it would be good for me to start thinking about my post-military career, even though I still had another deployment ahead of me. David was working as a project manager for a sustainable energy company, and he had this way of listening. That made you feel like you were the only person in the room. When Emma introduced us, he didn't thank me for my service with that awkward politeness most civilians used. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions about the infrastructure challenges we faced overseas and how my leadership experience might translate to managing civilian projects. He was genuinely interested in my perspective on logistics and team management, treating my military experience as valuable professional development rather than something to be pitied or awkwardly celebrated. We talked for hours that night, long after Emma had moved on to work the room with her natural social ease. David had grown up in a military family himself, though he had chosen college over service, and he understood the unique challenges of deployment cycles and military culture in a way that felt refreshing. When he asked for my number, I was surprised by how much I wanted to give it to him. The timing wasn't ideal, with my third deployment looming just 4 months away, but David was patient and understanding in ways that impressed me. During the months before I left, we spent countless hours together, talking about everything from career goals to family dynamics to our shared love of hiking and outdoor adventures. He would pick me up at dawn for trail runs, understanding that early mornings felt natural to me, And he never complained when I had to cut evenings short for early morning PT or training exercises. When I deployed for my final tour, David and I maintained a relationship that grew stronger despite the distance and time differences. His emails were thoughtful and detailed, full of updates about his work on renewable energy projects and questions about my experiences training Afghan National Army units. Unlike the generic support messages I received from other friends and family members, David's communications showed genuine curiosity about my daily life and respect for the work I was doing overseas. Emma, meanwhile, had landed what she considered her dream job as a social media coordinator for a boutique lifestyle brand. Her letters during this deployment were filled with excitement about influencer events, product launches, and the glamorous aspects of working in Seattle's tech-adjacent creative scene. She would send photos of herself at wine tastings and art gallery openings, always impeccably dressed and surrounded by other young professionals who looked like they had stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. I was genuinely happy for her success, even as I spent my days in body armor coordinating supply convoys and training sessions in 110-degree heat. The contrast between our lives had never been more apparent, but I had chosen my path and found meaning in it. Every successful mission, every Afghan soldier I helped train, every convoy that made it safely to its destination felt like a contribution to something larger than myself. When I returned from that final deployment, David was waiting at the airport, with flowers and a smile that made 8 months of separation feel worth it. We picked up our relationship exactly where we had left off, and within 3 months, he had proposed. The proposal itself was perfect. A sunset hike to a mountain peak we had climbed together before my deployment. With a ring he had designed himself, incorporating a small piece of metal from one of the challenge coins I had given him. Emma seemed genuinely excited about the engagement, immediately volunteering to help with wedding planning and offering to use her connections in the events industry to find vendors and venues. She threw herself into the role of maid of honor with enthusiasm, creating Pinterest boards and researching everything from photographers to florists, with the same energy she brought to her marketing campaigns. Looking back now, I realize that her enthusiasm should have been my first warning sign. Emma had never shown particular interest in weddings or romantic gestures before. She had dated casually throughout college and her early career, but never seemed invested in the idea of marriage or long-term commitment. Her sudden fascination with wedding planning details and her insistence on being involved in every decision should have raised red flags. But I was busy with my own transition out of military service and into my new civilian leadership role. The Veterans Affairs position had come with a steep learning curve, requiring me to master federal regulations, state compliance requirements, and complex interagency coordination processes. I was working 12-hour days trying to get up to speed on programs I was now responsible for overseeing, while also planning a wedding and adjusting to being back in civilian life full-time. David was incredibly supportive during this transition, understanding when I had to work late or travel for training sessions. He would bring dinner to my office when I couldn't get away, and he never complained when work stress made me withdrawn or difficult to be around. His patience and consistency provided the stability I needed as I navigated the challenging shift from military structure to civilian bureaucracy. The position itself was both rewarding and overwhelming. Every day brought new cases, new challenges, and new reminders of how many veterans were struggling with issues ranging from disability claims to housing assistance to mental health services. I was responsible for ensuring that programs ran efficiently and effectively, that federal funding was properly allocated, and that the veterans in my region received the support they had earned through their service. It was demanding work, but it felt like a natural extension of my military service. Instead of leading soldiers in combat, I was now leading efforts to support them in their post-military lives. The responsibility was enormous, but so was the satisfaction of knowing that the programs I oversaw made real differences in people's lives every single day. What Emma didn't fully understand, and what I had chosen not to advertise widely, was the true scope of influence that came with my position as Regional Director of Veterans Affairs. Most people, including my own family, heard the title and assumed it was simply a government desk job, something stable and respectable that paid well enough, but didn't carry real power or prestige. They couldn't have been more wrong. My office coordinated directly with senators' offices, congressional representatives, and state governors on veteran-related legislation and policy implementation. When major companies wanted to launch veteran hiring initiatives, they came through my department. When universities developed programs for veteran students, they needed my approval for federal funding. When housing developers wanted to participate in VA loan programs, they had to meet standards that my team enforced. The network of relationships I had built extended far beyond government agencies into corporate boardrooms, nonprofit leadership, and media outlets that covered veteran issues. I had deliberately kept this aspect of my work life separate from family gatherings and social events. Too many times, I had watched people's entire demeanor change once they understood the level of access and influence my position provided. Suddenly, conversations that had been natural and genuine became calculated and transactional. Friends started asking for favors. Distant relatives emerged with business propositions, and romantic interests began showing more enthusiasm for my career than for me as a person. David had been different from the beginning because he had gotten to know me before fully understanding my professional trajectory. When we met at that networking event, I had described myself simply as transitioning out of military service into veteran advocacy work. It wasn't technically dishonest, but it certainly didn't convey the full picture of what my role would become. By the time he learned the complete scope of my responsibilities, we had already established a relationship based on genuine compatibility and mutual respect. Emma's understanding of my work was even more limited. She knew I had gotten an important job with the VA, and she was proud in the abstract way that family members are when someone achieves professional success, but her world revolved around social media metrics, brand partnerships, and lifestyle marketing campaigns. Federal bureaucracy and veteran services might as well have been conducted on another planet for all the relevance they had to her daily experience. This disconnect allowed me to observe family dynamics and relationships without the complication of people calculating what they might gain from my professional connections. When Emma brought new friends to family dinners, I could see how they interacted with everyone when they thought I was just the older sister with a government job. When boyfriends came around, their behavior toward me reflected their genuine personalities rather than strategic networking attempts. Emma had always been naturally charming and socially gifted, but her work in marketing and social media had amplified these tendencies into something more calculating. She approached relationships the way she approached brand partnerships, evaluating what each connection could offer in terms of exposure, opportunities, or social capital. It wasn't necessarily malicious, but it was transactional in a way that sometimes made me uncomfortable. Her career had taken off faster than either of us had expected. What started as an entry-level social media coordinator position had evolved into a role where she managed multiple high-profile lifestyle brands and worked with influencers who had millions of followers. She traveled regularly to Los Angeles and New York for photo shoots and brand events, and her Instagram account showcased a carefully curated version of her life that looked impossibly glamorous. The contrast between our professional lives couldn't have been more stark. While she posted photos from rooftop parties and exclusive restaurant openings, I attended budget meetings and congressional briefings. While she collaborated with fashion brands and travel companies, I worked with homeless veteran advocates and disability rights attorneys. Her work was visible, aspirational, and designed to generate envy. My work was largely invisible to the public, focused on systemic change rather than individual recognition. But there were aspects of my position that Emma occasionally found useful. When she needed statistics for a Veterans Day campaign for one of her clients, she would call me for data and insights. When her company wanted to develop a military appreciation initiative, She asked for my perspective on appropriate messaging and outreach strategies. These requests were infrequent and seemed genuine, so I was always happy to help when I could. David, meanwhile, had begun to understand the broader implications of my work as our relationship deepened. His own career in sustainable energy brought him into contact with government programs and federal regulations, so he appreciated the complexity of managing large-scale public initiatives. He would ask thoughtful questions about the challenges I faced, and he seemed genuinely impressed by the scope of responsibility I carried. More importantly, he understood the weight of that responsibility in ways that Emma never had. He recognized that every decision I made affected real people's lives, that delays in program implementation could mean veterans going without needed services, and that the political aspects of my role required careful navigation to protect the programs I administered. When I came home frustrated after particularly difficult days, he knew how to provide support without trying to minimize the challenges I faced. Emma's approach to difficult situations was entirely different. When work stress affected her mood, it usually centered around social media campaigns that hadn't performed as expected, or client relationships that required delicate management. Her solutions involved creative problem-solving and relationship management, but the stakes were fundamentally different. A failed marketing campaign might cost her company money or damage her professional reputation, but it wouldn't leave families without housing assistance or veterans without healthcare access. This difference in the weight of our respective responsibilities had created an interesting dynamic in our family relationships. Our parents were proud of both of us, but they understood Emma's work in ways that mine remained somewhat abstract to them. They could see her Instagram posts and hear her stories about celebrity clients and exciting events. My work involved acronyms, federal regulations, and systemic issues that were harder to translate into dinner table conversation. The wedding planning process brought these differences into sharp focus. Emma approached it with the same aesthetic perfectionism she brought to her marketing campaigns, creating mood boards and vendor comparison spreadsheets with impressive attention to detail. Every element had to coordinate perfectly. Every vendor had to meet her standards for quality and presentation, and every aspect of the event had to reflect what she considered appropriate for our social status and professional achievements. Appreciated her enthusiasm and expertise, but sometimes her approach felt more focused on how the wedding would photograph for social media than on what David and I actually wanted for our celebration. She would suggest vendors based on their Instagram presence rather than their actual service quality, and she seemed more concerned with creating visually striking moments than with ensuring our guests felt comfortable and welcomed. David noticed this tension before I articulated it myself. During one particularly intense planning session where Emma had presented a 15-slide deck about floral arrangements, he gently suggested that we might want to prioritize elements that reflected our personalities and values rather than current wedding trends. Emma seemed confused by this perspective, asking what the point would be of having a wedding that didn't generate social media engagement and professional networking opportunities. It was during these conversations that I began to realize how differently Emma and I approached relationships and life decisions. Where I valued authenticity and genuine connection, she seemed to evaluate every choice through the lens of image management and strategic positioning. This wasn't necessarily wrong, but it represented a fundamental difference in priorities that I hadn't fully recognized before. The catalyst for everything that followed came on a crisp October evening when David and I were hosting our first official engagement party. We had decided to keep it relatively intimate, inviting close family and friends to our favorite restaurant's private dining room rather than organizing the elaborate celebration that Emma had been pushing for. The guest list included about 40 people, a mix of David's colleagues from the energy company, my former military friends who were now scattered across various civilian careers, family members, and a few of Emma's closest friends who had become part of our extended social circle over the years. Emma arrived fashionably late, as was her custom, wearing a stunning emerald green dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She had recently returned from a brand trip to Miami, and her tan was perfectly golden, her hair styled in loose waves that looked effortless, but had undoubtedly required professional attention. She moved through the room with practiced grace, air-kissing acquaintances and taking selfies with anyone willing to pose with her. What struck me immediately was how much attention she commanded simply by walking into the space. Conversations paused as people turned to look at her. Men straightened their posture when she approached their groups, and women began unconsciously adjusting their own appearance. Emma had always been beautiful, but her work in the lifestyle marketing industry had taught her how to weaponize that beauty, how to present herself in ways that made her the center of attention, without appearing to try too hard. David was in the middle of telling a story about our recent hiking trip to Mount Rainier when Emma joined our conversation circle. She listened for a few moments, then smoothly redirected the discussion to her recent photo shoot at a luxury resort in the Florida Keys. Within minutes, she had the entire group captivated by her descriptions of working with professional photographers, coordinating with celebrity stylists, and managing social media campaigns that reached millions of people. I watched this performance with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. Emma was genuinely talented at what she did, and her enthusiasm for her work was infectious. But there was something calculated about how she positioned herself as the most interesting person in every conversation, how she subtly diminished other people's experiences while elevating her own. When David tried to return to his hiking story, Emma interrupted with a comment about how she had been invited to photograph adventure gear for a major outdoor brand, making his personal anecdote seem mundane by comparison. The evening took an unexpected turn when Emma cornered me near the bar during a brief lull in the festivities. She had consumed several glasses of champagne, and her usual social filter was noticeably lowered. Her congratulations about the engagement felt genuine, but then she made a comment that caught me completely off guard. "You know, Sarah, you're so lucky that David is okay with your situation," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the room full of guests. "I mean, most guys our age want someone who can keep up with them professionally and socially. It's amazing that he doesn't mind, that your job is so limiting." I asked her what she meant by limiting, genuinely confused by her characterization of my work. Emma seemed surprised that I didn't understand her perspective, and she launched into an explanation that revealed assumptions I hadn't realized she was making about my life and career. According to Emma's assessment, my position with veterans affairs was respectable, but ultimately constraining. She saw government work as bureaucratic and inflexible, lacking the creativity and growth potential of private sector careers. She couldn't understand why I would choose to work within federal systems when I could leverage my military experience into corporate consulting or private security work that would pay significantly more and provide greater social status. More problematically, she seemed to view my work as somehow less sophisticated than hers. In her mind, helping veterans navigate disability claims and housing assistance was admirable in an abstract sense, but it wasn't the kind of career that positioned someone as a power player in professional and social circles. She couldn't see how my role could contribute to the kind of lifestyle and social status that she considered important for career success. This conversation revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both my motivations and my actual level of influence within veteran advocacy networks. Emma had no concept of the political relationships I maintained, the corporate partnerships I facilitated, or the policy initiatives I helped shape. She saw only the surface level of government bureaucracy without understanding the broader systems I worked within. What made the conversation particularly jarring was her implication that David was somehow settling by choosing to marry me. In Emma's worldview, successful men in their 30s should be partnering with women who could enhance their social status and professional networks. She seemed to view my career choice as a form of self-limitation that would ultimately hold David back from achieving his full potential. I tried to explain some of the broader aspects of my work, but Emma seemed unable to process information. that contradicted her existing assumptions. When I mentioned coordinating with congressional offices on veteran legislation, she nodded politely, but quickly changed the subject back to her own career achievements. When I described managing multi-million-dollar program budgets, she seemed to interpret this as boring administrative work rather than significant fiscal responsibility. The conversation was interrupted by David returning with fresh drinks, but Emma's comments had planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't quite shake. Was I somehow limiting David's social and professional opportunities by choosing meaningful work over lucrative or glamorous careers? Did my commitment to veteran advocacy reflect admirable values or simply a lack of ambition for personal advancement? David seemed to sense my changed mood as the evening progressed. During a quiet moment when most guests were focused on the dessert service, he asked if everything was okay. I decided to share Emma's comments, curious about his perspective on her assessment of our relationship dynamic. His response was immediate and unequivocal. He told me that my commitment to serving others, both during my military career and in my current role, was one of the things he found most attractive about me. He respected the difficulty of my work and the impact it had on people's lives in ways that purely profit-driven careers couldn't match. He had never felt that my career choices limited our relationship. Instead, he felt proud to be with someone whose work reflected such clear values and purpose. But David's reassurance couldn't completely erase the unsettling realization that Emma fundamentally misunderstood and undervalued the work I had chosen to dedicate my life to. It also raised questions about whether other people in our social circle shared similar assumptions about my career and its implications for my relationship with David. The remainder of the engagement party passed without incident, but I found myself observing interactions more carefully, wondering if Emma's perspective reflected broader social attitudes that I had been naive about. When David's colleagues talked about their work developing renewable energy projects, did they see my veteran advocacy work as somehow less important or impressive? When Emma's friends discussed their careers in marketing and media, were they privately questioning why someone with my education and experience had chosen government service over more lucrative options? These questions continued to trouble me in the days following the party. Emma's comments had forced me to confront assumptions I hadn't realized I was making about how others perceived my life choices. I had always been confident that my work was meaningful and important, but I had perhaps been naive about how that work was perceived in social and professional circles that prioritized different values. In the weeks following our engagement party, Emma's behavior became increasingly intrusive and presumptuous. What had started as helpful wedding planning assistance evolved into something that felt more like a hostile takeover of our entire celebration. She began making decisions without consulting David or me, booking vendor consultations and scheduling venue tours based on her own preferences rather than our stated wishes. The first major red flag came when she announced that she had secured a meeting with the most exclusive wedding planner in Seattle, someone who typically worked with tech executives and entertainment industry clients. Emma presented this as a generous gift, explaining that she had leveraged her professional connections and industry relationships to get us on this planner's calendar, despite their usual 6-month waiting list. When David and I attended the consultation, it became clear that Emma had already provided the planner with detailed information about our budget, guest count, and aesthetic preferences, without discussing any of these details with us first. The planner launched into a presentation about luxury venue options and high-end vendor partnerships that would cost 3 times what we had planned to spend, all based on information that Emma had apparently provided during their preliminary conversations. The most uncomfortable aspect of the meeting was how the wedding planner kept referencing Emma's input as though she were the primary decision-maker for our celebration. Every suggestion was prefaced with comments like, Emma mentioned, that you would want, or Emma felt that your style would lean toward. When David tried to redirect the conversation toward more modest options that aligned with our actual preferences, the planner seemed confused and slightly dismissive, as though our concerns were inconsequential compared to Emma's more sophisticated vision. After the meeting, Emma was practically bubbling with excitement about the possibilities the planner had presented. She had already started creating Pinterest boards for floral arrangements and color schemes that would coordinate with the luxury venues we had toured. When I explained that the budget and style recommendations were far beyond what David and I wanted for our wedding, Emma seemed genuinely shocked. She launched into a lengthy explanation about why we needed to think bigger and more strategically about our wedding celebration. According to Emma, our wedding was an opportunity to establish ourselves as a serious couple within Seattle's professional and social hierarchy. The guest list should include influential people who could advance David's career. The venue should reflect our aspirational lifestyle rather than our current circumstances, and every detail should be photographed and documented for maximum social media impact. Emma's vision for our wedding had apparently been shaped by the lifestyle brand events she managed professionally. She described elaborate tablescapes, custom lighting installations, and interactive experiences that would create what she called shareable moments for social media content. The celebration she envisioned bore no resemblance to the intimate, meaningful ceremony that David and I had discussed during our engagement planning conversations. When I tried to explain that we preferred a more personal and authentic celebration, Emma became visibly frustrated. She questioned whether we understood the social and professional implications of the choices we were making. In her view, a modest wedding would signal to David's colleagues and professional network that we lacked ambition and sophistication. She worried that my preference for meaningful traditions over trendy aesthetics would reflect poorly on both of us within the social circles we were trying to establish ourselves in. The conversation escalated when Emma suggested that my military background had given me a skewed perspective on appropriate celebrations. She explained that military weddings and veteran communities operated by different social rules than the professional circles that David moved in through his work in sustainable energy. According to her analysis, my comfort with simple ceremonies and focus on personal meaning, rather than public impression, reflected cultural differences that could ultimately limit David's career advancement opportunities. This line of reasoning revealed how little Emma understood about either my military experience or my current professional relationships. She seemed to imagine that veteran communities were somehow isolated from broader professional networks, and she had no awareness of the corporate and political connections that my work required me to maintain. Her assumption that military culture emphasized simplicity over sophistication showed a fundamental misunderstanding of the diversity within veteran communities and the leadership positions that many veterans occupied in civilian careers. David's response to Emma's increasing involvement was initially diplomatic, but became more direct as her interference intensified. He attended several vendor meetings with her to be polite, but he privately expressed frustration with her assumption that she understood our preferences better than we did. When Emma booked a cake tasting appointment without consulting us and then attended the appointment herself to narrow down options before we arrived, David finally confronted her directly about the boundaries she was crossing. Emma's reaction to David's feedback was defensive and manipulative. She positioned herself as the victim of ungrateful behavior, explaining that she was simply trying to ensure that our wedding reflected the level of success and sophistication that David deserved. She implied that my lack of enthusiasm for her suggestions reflected insecurity about my ability to plan an appropriate celebration for someone of David's caliber. The situation became even more problematic when Emma began reaching out to David's colleagues and friends to discuss wedding planning details. She contacted his co-workers to gather information about their own wedding experiences and vendor recommendations, presenting herself as the primary planner for our celebration. Several of David's friends mentioned these conversations to him, expressing confusion about why his future sister-in-law was taking such an active role in planning his wedding. Emma had also begun making comments about David's career prospects and professional development that crossed clear boundaries. She offered unsolicited advice about networking strategies, suggested professional development opportunities that aligned with her understanding of career advancement, and even reached out to her own industry contacts to explore whether any of them might have business opportunities that could benefit David's company. These interventions were ostensibly helpful, but they reflected Emma's assumption that David's current trajectory needed her guidance and enhancement. She seemed unable to accept that David was satisfied with his career path and didn't require her assistance in advancing his professional goals. Her suggestions consistently pushed toward more aggressive networking, higher-profile projects, and strategic career moves that prioritized visibility and prestige over meaningful work. The breaking point came when Emma announced that she had contacted a local lifestyle magazine about featuring our wedding in their upcoming issue about Seattle. Power couples. She had already provided them with preliminary information about our careers, our engagement story, and her vision for our wedding celebration. The magazine was interested in featuring us as an example of successful young professionals who were establishing themselves within the city's business and social communities. Emma presented this opportunity as though it were an incredible honor that she had secured through her industry connections and professional reputation. She couldn't understand why David and I weren't thrilled about the possibility of having our wedding documented and published for public consumption. When we explained that we preferred to keep our celebration private, Emma became genuinely upset, questioning whether we understood the networking and professional benefits that media coverage could provide. The magazine feature represented everything that David and I wanted to avoid about wedding planning. We had no interest in positioning our marriage as a strategic career move or social climbing opportunity. The idea of having photographers and journalists documenting our most personal moments for public consumption felt completely contrary to the intimate celebration we had envisioned. The discovery that would shatter everything came on a Tuesday morning in late November when I returned early from a 3-day conference in Portland. I had been attending the annual Pacific Northwest Veterans Policy Summit, where state directors and federal representatives gathered to coordinate program implementation and discuss upcoming legislative priorities. The conference had ended a day earlier than scheduled, so I decided to surprise David by coming home Tuesday evening instead of Wednesday, as originally planned. I arrived at our shared apartment around 8 in the evening, expecting to find David, either working late at his home office or relaxing with a book and a cup of tea, which had become his usual Tuesday routine during my work travels. The apartment was dimly lit, with soft music playing from the living room speaker system that we typically reserved for special occasions or romantic evenings together. What I found instead was Emma and David on our couch, sitting closer together than siblings-in-law should ever sit, with David's hand resting on Emma's thigh in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate rather than familial. They were sharing a bottle of wine that I recognized as the expensive Bordeaux David had been saving for our first anniversary, and Emma was wearing a silk dress that left little to the imagination about her intentions for the evening. The scene was so incongruous with everything I thought I knew about my relationship and my family that for several seconds I simply stood in the doorway trying to process what I was witnessing. David and Emma sprang apart when they noticed me, but the damage was already done. The guilt written across both of their faces confirmed that what I had walked in on was not an innocent family conversation that had accidentally become too close for comfort. Emma recovered first, launching into an elaborate explanation about how she had stopped by to discuss wedding planning details, and David had offered her wine to celebrate a major client success she had achieved that day. She spoke rapidly, weaving together half-truths and deflections in a way that might have been convincing if I hadn't seen them together with my own eyes. She claimed that David had been helping her process some work-related stress, and their close seating arrangement had been simply a result of reviewing wedding vendor contracts on David's laptop. David's response was quite different. He sat silently for several long moments, running his hands through his hair in a gesture I recognized as his way of processing difficult situations. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet and strained. He didn't offer elaborate justifications or attempt to minimize what had happened. Instead, he simply said that he was sorry, that things had gotten complicated, and that we needed to talk privately about what this meant for our relationship. Emma seemed shocked by David's directness. She had apparently expected him to support her version of events, to help maintain the fiction that nothing inappropriate had occurred. When she realized that David wasn't going to collaborate in covering up their affair, her demeanor shifted from nervous explanation to defensive attack. She began questioning whether I was overreacting to what she characterized as a misunderstanding between family members. According to Emma, my military background had made me suspicious and paranoid in ways that were damaging to my relationships. She suggested that my deployment experiences had affected my ability to trust people and interpret normal social interactions appropriately. This line of attack was particularly cruel because Emma knew that readjustment challenges were something many veterans struggled with, and that I had worked hard to address the hypervigilance and relationship difficulties that had followed my combat deployments. Her willingness to weaponize my military service against me in order to deflect from her own betrayal revealed a level of manipulation that I hadn't previously understood she was capable of. But Emma wasn't finished. As her defensive explanations became less credible, she shifted tactics entirely, moving from denial to justification. She began explaining how her relationship with David had developed gradually over the months of wedding planning, how they had discovered compatibility and connection that surprised both of them, and how they had tried to resist their feelings out of loyalty to me. According to Emma's narrative, she and David had found themselves drawn together by shared interests and values that they didn't feel they could explore with me. She described conversations about career ambitions, lifestyle preferences, and social goals that had revealed fundamental compatibility between them. She claimed that David had confided in her about feeling constrained by my career choices and concerned about the social limitations that my work in veterans affairs would place on their future together. Emma went into elaborate detail about these alleged conversations, describing how David had expressed doubts about whether my commitment to government service aligned with his own professional aspirations. She claimed that he had questioned whether my preference for meaningful work over lucrative opportunities would ultimately limit their ability to achieve the lifestyle and social status he wanted for their future family. The most devastating aspect of Emma's justification was how plausible she made it sound. She referenced specific conversations and concerns that aligned with doubts I had been harboring since our engagement party, when she had first suggested that my career choices might be limiting David's opportunities. Her ability to weave together legitimate relationship concerns with her own manipulation created a version of events that was difficult to completely dismiss. David's response to Emma's narrative was immediate and unequivocal. He denied having the conversations she described and rejected her characterization of his feelings about my career and our future together. He explained that while he had discussed wedding planning stress with Emma, those conversations had never included criticism of my work or concerns about our compatibility. But even as David defended our relationship and rejected Emma's version of events, the damage was already done. The trust that had been the foundation of our relationship had been shattered, not just by the physical betrayal I had witnessed, but by the psychological manipulation that Emma had apparently been conducting for months. Emma had systematically undermined my confidence in David's commitment to our relationship by planting seeds of doubt about my career choices and social status. She had positioned herself as more sophisticated and ambitious than me, while simultaneously presenting herself as someone who better understood David's needs and aspirations. Her wedding planning interference had been part of a broader campaign to establish herself as more suitable for David than I was. The realization that Emma had been working to destroy my relationship while pretending to help plan my wedding was almost more devastating than discovering the affair itself. She had used her access as my sister and maid of honor to gather information about David's preferences, concerns, and vulnerabilities, then positioned herself as the solution to problems she had helped create. As the full scope of Emma's manipulation became clear, I understood that this betrayal had been months in the making, carefully planned and executed by someone who knew exactly how to exploit both my trust in her and David's genuine care for family harmony. The confrontation that followed lasted well into the early hours of Wednesday morning, and it revealed layers of deception that went far deeper than the affair I had discovered. Once Emma realized that denial was no longer possible, she seemed to take perverse pleasure in detailing exactly how long she had been working to seduce David and undermine our relationship. Emma began by explaining how she had initially been genuinely happy about our engagement, but that her feelings had changed as she spent more time with David during the wedding planning process. She described how impressed she had been with his intelligence, his career prospects, and what she characterized as his wasted potential in a relationship with someone whose priorities were so different from his own. According to Emma, the first crack in her loyalty to me had come during a vendor meeting when David had expressed frustration with my insistence on keeping our wedding budget modest. She claimed that he had confided in her about feeling embarrassed by what he perceived as my unwillingness to celebrate our relationship in a way that reflected his professional status and social aspirations. I immediately challenged this characterization, pointing out that David and I had thoroughly discussed our wedding budget and had reached mutual agreement about our priorities. David confirmed this, explaining that while he had expressed some stress about wedding planning logistics, he had never criticized my financial decisions or suggested that our budget was inadequate. Emma waved off these denials, insisting that David was simply being diplomatic now that he had been caught. She proceeded to describe a series of conversations where David had allegedly expressed doubts about our compatibility, concerns about my career limiting his social advancement, and attraction to her own more sophisticated approach to professional and personal relationships. The specific details Emma provided were disturbing in their precision. She described conversations that had supposedly taken place during vendor meetings I hadn't attended, phone calls about wedding planning logistics when I was working late, and casual encounters when she had stopped by our apartment while I was traveling for work. She painted a picture of an emotional affair that had been building for months before escalating into physical intimacy. What made these revelations particularly devastating was how Emma had apparently used her access to our private life to gather information that she could later exploit. She knew David's work stress patterns, his concerns about career advancement, and his occasional frustrations with the demands of my travel schedule. She had taken legitimate relationship challenges that every couple faces and amplified them into justifications for her own behavior. Emma seemed almost proud as she described her strategy for positioning herself as more suitable for David than I was. She had researched his professional interests and prepared herself to engage in conversations about sustainable energy policy and corporate environmental initiatives. She had studied his social media presence to understand his lifestyle preferences and had carefully curated her own image to align with what she believed he found attractive. The manipulation extended to her interference in our wedding planning, which had apparently been designed not to help us create our ideal celebration, but to create stress and conflict that would drive a wedge between David and me. Every suggestion she had made that contradicted our preferences, every vendor she had booked without consulting us, and every expensive option she had pushed had been calculated to generate tension in our relationship. Emma had also been deliberately undermining my confidence by constantly questioning my career choices and suggesting that David deserved someone more ambitious and socially connected. Her comments at our engagement party about my work being limiting had been part of a sustained campaign to make me doubt my own worth and David's commitment to our relationship. David's reaction to these revelations was a mixture of shock, anger, and what appeared to be genuine remorse. He acknowledged that Emma had been an increasingly frequent presence in our lives during the wedding planning process, and that he had appreciated having someone to talk through the stress and logistics with when I was busy with work responsibilities. But David firmly denied the more serious allegations Emma was making about his feelings toward me and our relationship. He explained that while he had occasionally vented about wedding planning stress, he had never expressed doubts about our compatibility or criticized my career choices. He characterized his conversations with Emma as the kind of casual family support that he would have expected from any sister-in-law, not as intimate emotional confessions that justified her behavior. The most painful moment of the confrontation came when David admitted that Emma's attention and support had been flattering, and that he had enjoyed having someone who seemed so interested in his work and perspectives. He acknowledged that the boundaries between family support and inappropriate intimacy had become blurred gradually, and that he hadn't recognized the manipulation until it was too late. David's honesty about enjoying Emma's attention was difficult to hear, but it also revealed how sophisticated her manipulation had been. She had identified his need for support during a stressful period, and had positioned herself to meet that need in ways that gradually crossed appropriate boundaries. By the time David realized what was happening, Emma had already established emotional intimacy that made her physical advances seem like a natural progression rather than a betrayal. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to interpret David's admissions as validation of her version of events. She began insisting that their connection had been genuine and mutual, and that the only reason David was denying it now was because he felt guilty about hurting me. She suggested that if David was honest with himself, he would acknowledge that she was better suited to support his career ambitions and social goals than I was. This line of argument revealed Emma's fundamental misunderstanding of both David's character and the nature of healthy relationships. She seemed to believe that relationships were primarily strategic partnerships designed to advance mutual career and social interests, rather than emotional bonds based on genuine compatibility and shared values. When I pointed out that her behavior had violated not only my trust as her sister, but also basic ethical standards about respecting other people's relationships, Emma became defensive and hostile. She accused me of being naive about how relationships actually work in professional social circles, and suggested that my military background had given me unrealistic expectations about loyalty and integrity. Emma's willingness to attack my military service as part of her justification for betraying me was particularly revealing. She seemed to view my commitment to honor and integrity as weaknesses that made me unsuitable for the kind of strategic social relationships she believed were necessary for career success. The confrontation reached its climax when Emma demanded that David choose between us immediately. She insisted that he had to decide whether he wanted a relationship with someone who would support his ambitions and enhance his social status, or whether he wanted to remain tied to someone whose career, choices, and values would ultimately limit his potential. David's response was immediate and definitive. He told Emma that her ultimatum revealed exactly why she was wrong for him, and that her willingness to manipulate and betray family members demonstrated character flaws that made any relationship with her impossible. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So, if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The moment had come for Emma to understand exactly who she had chosen to betray and what kind of power she had underestimated. While she had been scheming to destroy my relationship based on her shallow assumptions about my career limitations, she had remained completely oblivious to the true scope of influence I wielded within the veteran advocacy network and its extensive corporate and political connections. The revelation began when Emma, still desperate to justify her actions, made one final attempt to convince David that I was holding him back professionally. She pulled out her phone and began showing him screenshots of social media posts from her lifestyle brand clients, pointing to the kind of high-profile social events and networking opportunities that she claimed he was missing by being associated with someone in government service. That's when I decided it was time for Emma to learn exactly what my position as Regional Director of Veterans Affairs actually meant in terms of real influence and professional connections. I walked to my home office and returned with a folder containing documentation that would shatter every assumption she had made about my career and social status. I started by showing David and Emma the guest list from the Pacific Northwest Veterans Policy Summit I had just returned from. The list included 2 senators, 4 congressional representatives, the governors of 3 states, and the CEOs of major corporations including Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon, and Nike. Emma's expression began to change as she realized that the boring government conference I had attended was actually a gathering of some of the most powerful political and business leaders in the region. Next, I pulled out correspondence from my files that demonstrated the scope of relationships I maintained. As part of my official duties, there were emails from the White House Office of Public Engagement requesting my input on veteran employment initiatives, letters from Fortune 500 companies seeking my approval for veteran hiring programs, and invitations to speak at corporate leadership conferences about diversity and inclusion strategies. Emma's face went pale as she began to understand that the woman she had dismissed as career-limited was actually operating at levels of influence she had never imagined. The social status and professional connections she had been so proud of in her lifestyle marketing career were insignificant compared to the network of relationships I had built through my work in veteran advocacy. I explained to Emma that my choice to keep the full extent of my professional influence private wasn't due to modesty or lack of ambition, but rather a deliberate strategy to maintain authentic relationships and avoid the kind of transactional interactions that had clearly shaped her own approach to social connections. The people in my network valued substance over style and results over image management. The documentation I shared included thank you letters from veteran families whose lives had been changed by programs I had implemented, commendations from military leadership for my work on transition assistance initiatives, and recognition from civilian organizations for my contributions to veteran employment and housing programs. These testimonials revealed the meaningful impact of my work in ways that Emma's social media metrics and brand partnership successes couldn't match. But the most devastating revelation was yet to come. I pulled out a folder containing information about Emma's current employer, the lifestyle marketing agency where she had built her career and derived so much of her professional identity. What Emma didn't know was that her agency had submitted a proposal 3 months earlier to manage social media and marketing campaigns for a major veteran employment initiative that my office was coordinating. I had been the primary decision-maker in evaluating their proposal, and I had personally reviewed Emma's portfolio and professional qualifications as part of the vendor selection process. The agency had won the contract, worth over $2 million annually, based partly on the strength of Emma's demonstrated expertise in social media marketing and brand management. Emma's shock at learning that I had been instrumental in securing one of her agency's most significant contracts was visible and immediate. She realized that while she had been working to undermine my career and steal my fiancé, I had actually been supporting her professional success without her knowledge. The irony was profound and devastating to her sense of superiority. I continued by explaining that the contract her agency had won was just one small part of the corporate partnerships I facilitated regularly. My office coordinated millions of dollars in federal funding for veteran programs, managed relationships with hundreds of private sector partners, and influenced policy decisions that affected veteran services across multiple states. The networking events that Emma had been so proud of attending, the corporate executives she had been impressed by meeting, and the business opportunities she had been so excited about securing were all operating at levels far below the relationships I maintained as part of my regular professional duties. Her lifestyle brand clients and social media influencer partnerships were essentially irrelevant compared to the policymaking and program implementation responsibilities I carried. David's expression during these revelations was a mixture of pride, shock, and what appeared to be genuine amazement. He had known that my work was important and meaningful, but even he hadn't fully understood the extent of influence and responsibility my position entailed. The woman Emma had characterized as career-limited and socially constraining was actually one of the most connected and influential people in the regional veteran advocacy network. Emma's response to these revelations was initially silence, then desperate attempts to minimize their significance. She suggested that government influence was different from private sector success, that political connections were less valuable than corporate relationships, and that my work in veteran services was still somehow limiting compared to careers in more glamorous industries. But her arguments rang hollow, now that the full scope of my professional network had been revealed. Emma was forced to confront the reality that she had spent months undermining someone whose career achievements and social connections far exceeded her own, and that her assessment of my limitations had been based on fundamental ignorance about how government service actually functioned at senior levels. The power dynamic between us had completely shifted. Where Emma had positioned herself as more sophisticated and professionally successful, she now understood that she had been operating in circles that were insignificant compared to my daily professional responsibilities. Her lifestyle marketing career, which had seemed so impressive and influential to her, was revealed as relatively minor compared to the policy-making and program management work I did regularly. I explained to Emma that the reason I hadn't advertised the full extent of my professional influence wasn't because I was ashamed of my career or limited by my choices, but because I preferred to maintain relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than strategic networking. The approach to social connections that she valued so highly was exactly what I had worked to avoid in my personal life. The most crushing blow came when I revealed that I had known about her financial struggles and professional insecurities long before she had begun her campaign to steal David. My position required me to maintain security clearances and conduct background investigations, and I had access to resources that had revealed her credit problems, employment instabilities, and the desperation that had driven her increasingly erratic behavior. Emma's carefully constructed image of professional success and social sophistication crumbled as she realized that I had been aware of her vulnerabilities all along, and that her attempts to position herself as superior to me had been transparent from the beginning. The immediate aftermath of my revelations was devastating for Emma in ways that went far beyond her failed attempt to steal David. As the reality of her miscalculations began to sink in, the carefully constructed facade of her professional and personal life started crumbling with shocking speed. David's rejection of Emma was swift and unequivocal. He told her that learning about her months of manipulation and betrayal had revealed character flaws that made any relationship between them impossible. More importantly, he explained that discovering the true scope of my professional achievements had made him realize how lucky he was to be with someone whose work had such meaningful impact and whose integrity was so unshakable. Emma's response to David's rejection was a mixture of desperation and fury. She couldn't accept that her sophisticated manipulation campaign had not only failed, but had actually strengthened David's appreciation for our relationship. She began making increasingly wild accusations, suggesting that I had somehow coerced or threatened David into rejecting her, that my military background had given me access to intimidation tactics that civilian women couldn't compete with. These accusations revealed how completely Emma had misunderstood both David's character and the nature of healthy relationships. She seemed unable to comprehend that David's choice to stay with me was based on genuine love and respect, rather than fear or manipulation. Her worldview was so transactional that she couldn't imagine relationships based on authentic emotional connection rather than strategic advantage. But Emma's personal rejection was only the beginning of the consequences she would face. Within hours of our confrontation, I began receiving phone calls from colleagues and professional contacts who had heard disturbing rumors about my family situation. Emma, in her desperation and fury, had apparently begun making calls to people she thought were part of my professional network, attempting to damage my reputation through false allegations about my conduct and character. What Emma didn't realize was that her attempts at professional sabotage were being directed toward people who had worked with me for years and understood my character and integrity intimately. Instead of damaging my reputation, her calls were having the opposite effect, revealing her own instability and vindictiveness to people who had never heard of her before, but now understood exactly what kind of person she was. The most serious mistake Emma made was calling my office directly and speaking to my assistant about what she characterized as urgent family matters that required immediate attention. She attempted to schedule meetings with members of my staff, claiming that she had important information about conflicts of interest and ethical violations that needed to be reported to my supervisors. My assistant, who had been trained to handle security concerns and inappropriate contacts, immediately documented Emma's calls and reported them through proper channels. Within 24 hours, I received a formal inquiry from our office security coordinator about potential family-related security risks that might affect my clearance status or professional responsibilities. I was able to address the security inquiry quickly and professionally by providing complete documentation of Emma's attempts to manipulate and sabotage both my personal and professional life. The security review actually worked in my favor because it created an official record of Emma's inappropriate behavior and established a clear timeline of her escalating misconduct. But the consequences for Emma were severe and immediate. Her attempts to contact government officials and make false allegations about federal employees had triggered automatic security protocols that resulted in her being flagged as a potential threat to government personnel. Her name was now in databases that would make future government employment or security clearances impossible for her to obtain. More devastating for Emma's immediate situation was the impact her behavior had on her own professional relationships. The lifestyle marketing agency where she worked had strict policies about employee conduct that could reflect poorly on their corporate reputation. When her supervisors learned that she was making inappropriate calls to government offices and attempting to damage the reputation of a federal official, they began an immediate investigation into her professional conduct. The investigation revealed additional problematic behavior that Emma had been engaging in for months. Her colleagues reported that she had been increasingly erratic and unreliable, missing important client meetings and failing to deliver promised work products on schedule. Several clients had complained about her unprofessional communication and her tendency to overpromise results that she couldn't deliver. Emma's financial situation, which I had already been aware of through my security background checks, became critical as her professional situation deteriorated. She had been living beyond her means for months, financing her expensive lifestyle through credit cards and personal loans that she couldn't afford on her actual salary. The stress of maintaining her facade of success while dealing with mounting debt had apparently been driving her increasingly desperate behavior. When Emma's agency placed her on administrative leave pending the completion of their investigation, she lost access to the client relationships and brand partnerships that had been generating most of her income. The influencer collaborations and lifestyle brand deals that had supported her expensive tastes were all contingent on her employment status and professional reputation, both of which were now severely compromised. The social consequences were equally devastating. Emma's friend group, which was largely composed of other lifestyle marketing professionals and social media influencers, began distancing themselves from her as news of her professional troubles spread through their networks. The same social media presence that had been so carefully curated to project success and sophistication now became a liability as people began scrutinizing her posts and questioning the authenticity of her lifestyle claims. David, meanwhile, was dealing with his own reckoning about the affair and his role in the situation. While he had ultimately rejected Emma and chosen to stay with me, he understood that rebuilding trust in our relationship would require significant time and effort. He voluntarily enrolled in counseling to address how he had been susceptible to Emma's manipulation and to develop better boundaries for future family relationships. David also took the initiative to inform his own family and friends about what had happened, accepting responsibility for his part in the affair, while also explaining the extent of Emma's manipulation and betrayal. His honesty about the situation and his commitment to repairing our relationship impressed me, even as I struggled with the emotional impact of his betrayal. Our wedding planning, which had been the vehicle for Emma's manipulation campaign, was suspended indefinitely while David and I worked through the aftermath of her betrayal. The vendors Emma had contacted on our behalf had to be notified about the change in our timeline, and several of them shared that they had found her behavior during planning meetings to be unusually controlling and inappropriate. The most painful aspect of the immediate aftermath was dealing with our parents' reactions to Emma's behavior. Our mother initially refused to believe that Emma could have acted so manipulatively and destructively, suggesting that there must have been misunderstandings or miscommunications that had escalated unnecessarily. Our father was more willing to accept the evidence of Emma's misconduct, but he struggled with the implications for our family relationships. Emma's attempts to maintain her innocence and shift blame became increasingly desperate as the consequences of her actions mounted. She continued to insist that David had encouraged her behavior, and that my reaction was disproportionate to what she characterized as simple family relationship dynamics that had gotten complicated. Emma's desperation reached dangerous new heights when she realized that her attempts at professional sabotage had not only failed, but had actually accelerated her own downfall. Rather than accepting responsibility for her actions or attempting to repair the damage she had caused, she chose to escalate her attacks in ways that would ultimately destroy what remained of her life. The counterattack began with Emma hiring a private investigator to dig up information that she could use against me professionally. She apparently believed that if she could find evidence of misconduct or conflicts of interest in my work with Veterans Affairs, she could force me to withdraw from David's life to protect my career. What Emma didn't understand was that my position required regular security reviews and ethical compliance audits that had already thoroughly examined every aspect of my professional conduct. The private investigator Emma hired was apparently less than reputable because instead of conducting a legitimate background investigation, he began making inappropriate contacts with my colleagues and attempting to access confidential government records. These activities triggered immediate security alerts within the federal system, and within 48 hours, both Emma and the investigator she had hired were under investigation for potential violations of federal privacy laws and security regulations. The escalation continued when Emma began spreading false information about me through social media and professional networking platforms. She created detailed posts describing what she characterized as my abuse of government resources, my inappropriate use of official relationships for personal benefit, and my alleged intimidation of family members who disagreed with my career choices. Emma's social media campaign revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of how professional reputation management actually worked. While she was accustomed to generating engagement through lifestyle content and brand partnerships, her attempts at character assassination were immediately recognizable as vindictive personal attacks, rather than legitimate professional concerns. The posts backfired spectacularly because Emma's social media history was publicly available and clearly demonstrated her own recent professional and personal instability. Anyone who investigated her claims could see the timeline of her deteriorating career situation and recognize her motivation for attacking me. Her carefully curated lifestyle brand image worked against her, making her current desperation and vindictiveness even more obvious by contrast. More devastating for Emma was the response from the professional community she was trying to influence. Veterans Affairs, professionals, government officials, and corporate partners who worked with my office rallied to defend my reputation with testimonials about my integrity and professionalism. The outpouring of support revealed the depth of respect I had earned through years of dedicated service and ethical conduct. Emma found herself facing a coordinated response from people who had never heard of her before, but understood exactly what she was attempting to do. Corporate executives, military leaders, and government officials began sharing their own experiences, working with me, creating a public record of professional achievements and personal character that completely undermined Emma's false allegations. The situation escalated further when Emma's desperation drove her to contact David's employer directly. She apparently believed that if she could convince his company that their relationship with me posed professional risks or reputation problems, they would pressure David to end our relationship to protect his career advancement opportunities. Emma's call to David's supervisor was a catastrophic miscalculation. The sustainable energy company where David worked had extensive contracts with government agencies and maintained strict policies about employee conduct and external pressure. When Emma attempted to pressure them into influencing David's personal relationships, she triggered corporate security protocols that resulted in a formal complaint being filed against her for attempted harassment and intimidation. David's company took the matter seriously enough to involve their legal department and to coordinate with law enforcement about Emma's escalating pattern of harassment and intimidation. The documentation they provided became part of a growing file of evidence about Emma's increasingly erratic and potentially dangerous behavior. But Emma's most devastating mistake was yet to come. In her fury over the failure of her other tactics, she decided to target the one relationship I valued most, my work-serving veteran communities. She began contacting veteran organizations directly, spreading false information about my character and professional conduct in an attempt to undermine my effectiveness in serving the people I had dedicated my career to helping. This attack crossed a line that triggered my own decisive response. While I had been willing to handle Emma's personal betrayal and even her professional sabotage attempts with relative restraint, her willingness to damage programs that served vulnerable veteran populations was unforgivable. I activated the full extent of my professional network to document and counter her campaign of misinformation. The response was swift and overwhelming. Veteran advocacy organizations, military leadership, and government officials who had worked with me for years began sharing detailed accounts of my service and dedication. The contrast between their testimonials about my character and Emma's obviously vindictive attacks made her motivations transparent to anyone who was paying attention. Emma found herself facing legal consequences that she had never anticipated. Her attempts to access confidential government records, her harassment of federal employees, and her interference with government contracts had violated multiple federal laws. The FBI opened an investigation into her activities, treating them as potential threats to government operations and personnel. The financial consequences were equally severe. Emma's mounting legal bills, combined with her loss of employment and the collapse of her lifestyle brand partnerships, left her unable to maintain the expensive lifestyle she had been financing through credit and loans. Her Seattle apartment, which she had been renting at prices far beyond her actual means, became unaffordable when her income disappeared. Emma's attempts to maintain her living situation through additional borrowing failed because her credit rating had been destroyed by missed payments and the financial chaos of her deteriorating professional situation. The lifestyle brands that had once been eager to partner with her now distanced themselves completely, unwilling to associate their products with someone who was under federal investigation for harassment and intimidation. The social consequences were perhaps the most devastating for someone who had built her entire identity around image management and social status. Emma's friend group, professional network, and social media following began distancing themselves as news of her legal troubles and erratic behavior spread through Seattle's lifestyle marketing community. The same social media presence that had once been Emma's greatest asset became a liability as her increasingly desperate and vindictive posts documented her mental deterioration for public consumption. Brand partners, potential employers, and social connections could see in real time how her professional facade was crumbling under the pressure of consequences she had brought on herself. Emma's parents, who had initially been reluctant to believe the extent of her misconduct, were forced to confront the reality of her situation when law enforcement contacted them as part of their investigation. The evidence of her manipulation, betrayal, and escalating criminal behavior was too overwhelming to dismiss or minimize. The final blow came when Emma's apartment management company served her with eviction notices for non-payment of rent. Her attempts to negotiate payment plans or extensions failed because her employment termination and legal troubles made her an unacceptable financial risk. The same lifestyle apartment complex that had once been the backdrop for her carefully curated social media content became the site of her humiliating removal. 18 months have passed since that devastating November evening when I discovered Emma's betrayal, and the aftermath has revealed truths about family, loyalty, and justice that I never expected to learn. The resolution of Emma's situation came through a combination of legal consequences, natural justice, and her own continued poor decision-making that accelerated her complete downfall. Emma's federal investigation concluded with her pleading guilty to harassment of government employees, attempted interference with federal contracts, and violations of privacy laws related to her hiring of the disreputable private investigator. The plea agreement resulted in a suspended prison sentence, 3 years of probation, substantial fines, and a permanent ban from government employment or security clearances. But the legal consequences were only part of Emma's punishment. Her professional reputation in Seattle's lifestyle marketing industry was completely destroyed, and her attempts to rebuild her career in other cities failed, because background checks invariably revealed her criminal record and the circumstances that led to it. The same social media presence that had once been her greatest professional asset became a permanent record of her downfall that potential employers could easily discover. The financial devastation was even more complete. Emma's mounting legal bills, combined with her inability to secure stable employment, forced her into bankruptcy. She lost access to the credit and loan systems that had been supporting her expensive lifestyle, and she discovered that maintaining the image of success was impossible without the income to support it. Most devastating of all was Emma's complete social isolation. The friend networks and professional relationships she had cultivated throughout her career dissolved when people learned about her behavior toward family members and her attempts to manipulate government systems for personal revenge. The lifestyle marketing community is surprisingly small and interconnected, and Emma's reputation for vindictive and erratic behavior made her unemployable within her chosen field. 6 months ago, Emma was evicted from her final apartment in Seattle, and has since been staying in temporary housing and occasionally with distant acquaintances who are unaware of her full history. Her attempts to rebuild her life have been hampered by her continued refusal to accept responsibility for her actions and her persistent belief that she was the victim of circumstances beyond her control. The most telling aspect of Emma's continued struggles is her inability to understand why her life fell apart so completely. She continues to blame me for her professional destruction, David for leading her on, and various other people for failing to support her during her difficulties. Her failure to acknowledge her own role in creating the situation has prevented her from making the changes necessary to rebuild her life successfully. 3 weeks ago, Emma contacted me for the first time since our confrontation. She called from a phone number I didn't recognize, and her voice was barely recognizable when she finally identified herself. She was calling to ask for help, claiming that she was homeless and desperate, and suggesting that as her sister, I had an obligation to support her during her time of need. The conversation was brief and painful. Emma seemed genuinely shocked that I was unwilling to provide financial assistance or professional references that might help her find employment. She couldn't understand why her betrayal of my trust and her attempts to destroy my career and relationship had permanently damaged our family relationship. I explained to Emma that while I wished her well and hoped she would eventually find stability and happiness, I couldn't support someone who had demonstrated such willingness to harm others for personal advantage. Her actions had revealed character traits that made any relationship between us impossible, and her continued refusal to accept responsibility for her choices meant that she was likely to repeat similar behaviors in the future. Emma's response to my refusal revealed that she had learned nothing from the consequences of her previous behavior. She became immediately hostile and threatening, suggesting that she still had information that could damage my reputation and career if I didn't provide the assistance she was requesting. Her attempt to blackmail me into helping her demonstrated that her fundamental approach to relationships remained transactional and manipulative. I informed Emma that any further attempts to contact me or interfere with my life would be reported to her probation officer as violations of the terms of her legal settlement. The call ended with her angrily accusing me of being heartless and vindictive, apparently unable to recognize the irony of those accusations coming from someone who had tried to destroy my life out of jealousy and greed. David and I have rebuilt our relationship stronger than it was before Emma's interference. The counseling process was difficult, but ultimately beneficial, helping us establish better communication patterns and boundaries that will protect our relationship from future manipulation attempts. David's willingness to accept responsibility for his role in the affair and his commitment to earning back my trust demonstrated the character traits that had attracted me to him originally. We were married 8 months ago in a small ceremony that focused on the meaningful traditions and personal elements we had always wanted for our celebration. The wedding was everything that Emma's elaborate vision was not: intimate, authentic, and centered on our commitment to each other, rather than image management or social networking opportunities. The contrast between our celebration and the lifestyle, brand events that Emma had once managed so successfully, served as a reminder of the different values that had always separated us. Our wedding was attended by people who cared about us personally, rather than what we could do for their careers, and the celebration reflected our genuine priorities, rather than aspirational lifestyle goals. My career has continued to flourish in ways that validate my choice to prioritize meaningful work over status-focused opportunities. I was recently promoted to oversee Veteran Affairs coordination for the entire Western United States, a position that carries even greater responsibility and influence than my previous role. The recognition of my leadership abilities and ethical standards has opened doors to policy-making opportunities that allow me to affect positive change on a national scale. The veteran programs I oversee have achieved record success rates in housing assistance, employment placement, and healthcare access, results that demonstrate the value of prioritizing substance over style in professional relationships. The network of corporate partnerships, government connections, and advocacy relationships I have built continues to grow, providing resources and opportunities that benefit thousands of veteran families across multiple states. David's career has also benefited from our relationship in ways that completely contradict Emma's predictions about my supposed limitations. His association with veteran advocacy work has enhanced his reputation within the sustainable energy industry, where corporate social responsibility and community engagement are increasingly valued. Several major contracts his company has secured have come through connections facilitated by my professional network. The lesson I learned about family relationships is that blood connections don't guarantee loyalty or integrity, and that sometimes the people closest to you are capable of the greatest betrayal. But I also learned that genuine relationships based on shared values and mutual respect can survive challenges that would destroy connections built on convenience or strategic advantage. Most importantly, I learned that living authentically and prioritizing meaningful work over image management creates a foundation of real influence in genuine relationships that cannot be undermined by jealousy or manipulation. The same integrity that Emma saw as a limitation has become the source of strength that allowed me to weather her attacks and emerge stronger than before. 2 months after Emma's desperate phone call, I received unexpected news that would add a final, ironic twist to her story of manipulation and downfall. The call came from Marcus Rodriguez, Emma's former boyfriend who had dated her for nearly 2 years before their relationship ended 6 months prior to her affair with David. Marcus had been trying to reach me through mutual acquaintances because he had information he believed I needed to hear about Emma's pattern of behavior. Marcus explained that he had been following Emma's situation from a distance, partly out of concern and partly out of curiosity about whether she would eventually face consequences for behavior he had witnessed during their relationship. What he revealed during our conversation painted an even darker picture of Emma's character than I had previously understood. According to Marcus, Emma's manipulation and betrayal of family relationships was not an isolated incident triggered by jealousy over my engagement. Instead, it was part of a consistent pattern of behavior that had characterized her approach to relationships throughout her adult life. Marcus described how Emma had systematically attempted to undermine his relationships with friends, family members, and colleagues during their time together. The most disturbing revelation was that Emma had tried the exact same strategy with Marcus that she had used with David. She had identified his closest relationships and had worked to position herself as more compatible, understanding, and supportive than the people he had previously trusted. When Marcus's sister had gotten engaged, Emma had inserted herself into the wedding planning process and had attempted to create conflict between Marcus and his family by suggesting that his sister's choices reflected poorly on his own social status. Marcus had eventually ended their relationship when he discovered that Emma had been intercepting and hiding messages from his family members, creating artificial conflicts that she could then position herself to resolve. She had been manipulating his social calendar to limit his time with friends and had been spreading false information about his family's financial situation to mutual acquaintances. The pattern Marcus described was chillingly familiar, and it made me realize that Emma's betrayal of me had been neither spontaneous nor unique. She had been practicing and refining these manipulation techniques for years, using intimate relationships as laboratories for developing increasingly sophisticated methods of control and sabotage. Marcus also revealed that Emma had been struggling with financial and professional instability long before her campaign against me had begun. Her expensive lifestyle and carefully curated social media presence had been funded through a combination of credit card debt, personal loans from friends and family members, and income from brand partnerships that she had been obtaining through increasingly questionable means. Several of the lifestyle brands Emma had claimed to be working with officially had actually been paying her for social media posts without formal contracts or legal protections. When these informal arrangements had begun to fall apart due to her erratic behavior and unreliable content delivery, Emma had become desperate to maintain her income and social status through any means necessary. Marcus believed that Emma's targeting of David had been motivated as much by financial desperation as by romantic attraction. She had seen David as a potential solution to her mounting debt problems and had viewed stealing him from me as a way to access both financial stability and social status that could help her rebuild her failing career. The conversation with Marcus led me to investigate Emma's situation more thoroughly, and what I discovered was even more troubling than I had expected. Emma had not simply fallen on hard times following our confrontation. She had been systematically burning bridges and destroying relationships for months before her affair with David had even begun. I learned that Emma had been fired from 2 previous marketing positions for inappropriate conduct that included attempting to poach clients for personal projects, misrepresenting her authority to make decisions on behalf of her employers, and creating conflicts between colleagues that disrupted workplace productivity. Her final employer had kept these issues private to avoid legal complications. But Emma's pattern of professional misconduct had made her essentially unemployable within the Seattle marketing community. More significantly, I discovered that Emma had been engaging in increasingly erratic behavior that suggested deeper psychological issues than simple selfishness or poor judgment. Former friends and colleagues described episodes where Emma had become convinced that people were conspiring against her, periods where she had made grandiose claims about professional opportunities that didn't actually exist, and instances where she had lashed out violently when her version of events was challenged by objective evidence. These revelations led me to contact a family therapist who specialized in personality disorders and manipulative behavior patterns. The therapist explained that Emma's consistent pattern of relationship sabotage, her inability to accept responsibility for her actions, and her persistent belief that she was the victim of other people's jealousy and conspiracy, suggested the possibility of serious mental health issues that would require professional intervention to address. The therapist also helped me understand why Emma's attempts to rebuild her life had been consistently unsuccessful. Her refusal to acknowledge her own role in creating her problems meant that she continued to make the same types of choices that had led to her downfall, expecting different results while repeating the same destructive patterns. Armed with this new understanding, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I reached out to Emma one final time, not to offer assistance or reconciliation, but to provide her with information about mental health resources that might help her address the underlying issues driving her destructive behavior. The conversation was brief and difficult. Emma initially seemed hopeful that I was calling to offer help or forgiveness, but she became defensive and hostile when I explained that I was simply providing referral information for psychological counseling and support services. She insisted that she didn't need therapy and that her problems were entirely the result of other people's actions against her. Emma's reaction to my offer of mental health resources confirmed the therapist's assessment that she was unlikely to seek help voluntarily or engage productively with treatment even if it was provided. Her continued refusal to acknowledge any personal responsibility for her situation meant that she would probably continue to struggle until she reached a point where professional intervention became mandatory rather than voluntary. The final ironic twist came 6 weeks later when I received a LinkedIn message from David's successor at his previous project management position. The message informed me that Emma had somehow obtained David's employment history and had been contacting his former colleagues, attempting to gather information that she could use to damage his current career prospects. Emma's continued obsession with David and her persistent attempts to interfere in our lives demonstrated that her situation had not motivated any genuine self-reflection or behavior change. Even facing homelessness and complete social isolation, she remained focused on external blame and revenge, rather than addressing the internal issues that had created her problems. The attempted harassment of David's former colleagues proved to be Emma's final mistake. Her probation officer was informed of these activities, and they were classified as violations of the terms that had allowed her to avoid prison time. Emma was arrested and sentenced to 18 months in county jail, finally facing the incarceration that her plea agreement had originally suspended. David and I decided that Emma's imprisonment provided an opportunity for us to relocate and establish fresh boundaries that would protect us from any future contact. My promotion to national-level responsibilities had created opportunities for us to transfer to Washington, D.C., where my expanded role would involve coordinating veteran affairs policy across all 50 states. The move represented not just a career advancement, but a symbolic fresh start that would place us physically and professionally beyond Emma's reach. The position would involve working directly with cabinet-level officials and congressional leadership, responsibilities that would make my work even more meaningful and impactful than it had been in my regional role. 3 years have passed since Emma's imprisonment, and the perspective that time provides has allowed me to see the full scope of how her betrayal ultimately became the catalyst for positive changes that transformed every aspect of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. The move to Washington, D.C. proved to be exactly the fresh start that David and I needed, but it also opened doors to opportunities and relationships that have exceeded my most ambitious professional goals. My new position as National Director of Veterans Affairs Coordination has placed me at the center of policy discussions that affect millions of veterans and their families across the country. The role involves regular meetings with senators, congressional representatives, cabinet officials, and the President's domestic policy team, responsibilities that have given me influence over federal legislation and program implementation at the highest levels of government. The irony has not been lost on me that Emma's attempts to diminish my career and social status ultimately led to my achieving levels of professional success and political influence that far exceed anything she had ever aspired to in her lifestyle marketing career. Her manipulation and betrayal forced me to fully utilize and demonstrate the professional network and leadership capabilities that I had been keeping private, revealing strengths and connections that have become the foundation for even greater achievements. David's career has flourished alongside mine in ways that validate our decision to prioritize authentic relationships and meaningful work over image management and strategic networking. His company's sustainable energy projects have benefited enormously from the federal policy connections I maintain, and several major contracts his firm has secured have come through partnerships facilitated by my office. More importantly, David has discovered that his association with high-level veteran advocacy work has enhanced his reputation within the environmental and energy sectors, where corporate social responsibility and community engagement are increasingly valued by both clients and investors. The same relationship that Emma had characterized as limiting has become a source of professional opportunity and personal satisfaction for both of us. Our marriage has grown stronger through the challenges we faced during Emma's campaign of manipulation and the rebuilding process that followed. The counseling we underwent together taught us communication skills and boundary-setting techniques that have improved every aspect of our relationship. We learned to recognize and resist manipulation attempts, to prioritize direct, honest communication over polite avoidance of difficult topics, and to support each other's individual goals while maintaining our partnership. Last year, we welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Hope. Her arrival has added new meaning to both of our careers, as we now think about the kind of world we want to build for her future. My work affecting veteran policy has taken on additional significance as I consider the military families and service members who will shape the society our daughter grows up in. David's environmental work has become more personally urgent as climate change and sustainability issues directly affect the kind of planet we will leave for Hope and her generation. The alignment between our professional values and our personal priorities has created a sense of purpose and direction that strengthens our marriage and motivates our individual achievements. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through official channels from Emma, who was by then nearing the end of her jail sentence. The letter was different in tone from our previous communications, suggesting that incarceration had finally forced her to confront some of the realities about her behavior and its consequences that she had previously been able to avoid. Emma wrote that she had been participating in mandatory counseling programs during her imprisonment and had begun to understand the psychological patterns that had driven her destructive choices. She acknowledged that her attempts to steal David and sabotage my career had been wrong, and she expressed what appeared to be genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. The letter also revealed that Emma had been using her time in jail to complete educational programs that might help her build legitimate career skills when she was released. She had earned certifications in basic accounting and administrative support, practical qualifications that would allow her to find entry-level employment that didn't require the social media presence and lifestyle branding that had characterized her previous work. Most significantly, Emma's letter included an apology that acknowledged specific actions she had taken to harm me and David, taking responsibility for choices she had previously blamed on circumstances or other people's behavior. For the first time since our childhood, Emma seemed to be demonstrating genuine self-awareness and accountability for her actions. However, the letter also included a request that I was not prepared to grant. Emma asked if I would be willing to provide a character reference or employment recommendation that might help her find work when she was released from jail. She suggested that a letter from someone in my position would carry significant weight with potential employers and might help her rebuild her life on a more honest foundation. I consulted with David and with the therapist we had worked with during our marriage counseling about how to respond to Emma's request. The consensus was that while Emma's apparent progress was encouraging, providing professional references would be inappropriate given the extent of her previous manipulation and the ongoing need to maintain boundaries that protected our family. Wrote back to Emma explaining that while I was glad to hear about her educational progress and therapeutic work, I could not provide employment recommendations given our history and my responsibilities to potential employers who would rely on my professional judgment. I encouraged her to continue with counseling and to build references through the programs and relationships she was developing independently. Emma's response to my refusal was mature and understanding, a significant change from her previous pattern of becoming hostile when her requests were denied. She thanked me for considering her situation and acknowledged that rebuilding trust would require demonstrating sustained positive behavior over time rather than expecting immediate forgiveness or assistance. The exchange gave me hope that Emma might finally be developing the self-awareness and personal responsibility that would allow her to build a stable, honest life when she was released. While I had no intention of resuming a personal relationship with her, her apparent progress suggested that she might finally be breaking the cycle of manipulation and self-destruction that had characterized her adult life. Emma was released from jail 4 months ago, and according to information I received through our parents, she has been living in a transitional housing program and working at an entry-level administrative position with a nonprofit organization that provides services to formerly incarcerated individuals. Her social media presence has disappeared entirely, and she appears to be focused on building practical life skills rather than maintaining the carefully curated image that had previously defined her identity. The contrast between Emma's current situation and the lifestyle she had been so desperate to maintain 3 years ago serves as a powerful reminder about the difference between authentic success and superficial status. The expensive apartment, designer clothes, and exclusive social events that had seemed so important to her had all been built on unsustainable foundations of debt, manipulation, and professional misconduct. Meanwhile, the modest government career that Emma had dismissed as limiting has provided me with financial security, meaningful work, and genuine influence that grows stronger each year. The authentic relationships David and I have built based on shared values and mutual respect have created a foundation for happiness and success that manipulation and image management could never have achieved. 3 years have passed since Emma's imprisonment, and the perspective that time provides has allowed me to see the full scope of how her betrayal ultimately became the catalyst for positive changes that transformed every aspect of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. The move to Washington, D.C. proved to be exactly the fresh start that David and I needed, but it also opened doors to opportunities and relationships that have exceeded my most ambitious professional goals. My new position as National Director of Veterans Affairs Coordination has placed me at the center of policy discussions that affect millions of veterans and their families across the country. The role involves regular meetings with senators, congressional representatives, cabinet officials, and the President's domestic policy team, responsibilities that have given me influence over federal legislation and program implementation at the highest levels of government. The irony has not been lost on me that Emma's attempts to diminish my career and social status ultimately led to my achieving levels of professional success and political influence that far exceed anything she had ever aspired to in her lifestyle marketing career. Her manipulation and betrayal forced me to fully utilize and demonstrate the professional network and leadership capabilities that I had been keeping private, revealing strengths and connections that have become the foundation for even greater achievements. David's career has flourished alongside mine in ways that validate our decision to prioritize authentic relationships and meaningful work over image management and strategic networking. His company's sustainable energy projects have benefited enormously from the federal policy connections I maintain, and several major contracts his firm has secured have come through partnerships facilitated by my office. More importantly, David has discovered that his association with high-level veteran advocacy work has enhanced his reputation within the environmental and energy sectors, where corporate social responsibility and community engagement are increasingly valued by both clients and investors. The same relationship that Emma had characterized as limiting has become a source of professional opportunity and personal satisfaction for both of us. Our marriage has grown stronger through the challenges we faced during Emma's campaign of manipulation and the rebuilding process that followed. The counseling we underwent together taught us communication skills and boundary-setting techniques that have improved every aspect of our relationship. We learned to recognize and resist manipulation attempts, to prioritize direct, honest communication over polite avoidance of difficult topics, and to support each other's individual goals while maintaining our partnership. Last year, we welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Hope. Her arrival has added new meaning to both of our careers, as we now think about the kind of world we want to build for her future. My work affecting veteran policy has taken on additional significance as I consider the military families and service members who will shape the society our daughter grows up in. David's environmental work has become more personally urgent as climate change and sustainability issues directly affect the kind of planet we will leave for Hope and her generation. The alignment between our professional values and our personal priorities has created a sense of purpose and direction that strengthens our marriage and motivates our individual achievements. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected letter forwarded through official channels from Emma, who was by then nearing the end of her jail sentence. The letter was different in tone from our previous communications, suggesting that incarceration had finally forced her to confront some of the realities about her behavior and its consequences that she had previously been able to avoid. Emma wrote that she had been participating in mandatory counseling programs during her imprisonment and had begun to understand the psychological patterns that had driven her destructive choices. She acknowledged that her attempts to steal David and sabotage my career had been wrong, and she expressed what appeared to be genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. The letter also revealed that Emma had been using her time in jail to complete educational programs that might help her build legitimate career skills when she was released. She had earned certifications in basic accounting and administrative support, practical qualifications that would allow her to find entry-level employment that didn't require the social media presence and lifestyle branding that had characterized her previous work. Most significantly, Emma's letter included an apology that acknowledged specific actions she had taken to harm me and David, taking responsibility for choices she had previously blamed on circumstances or other people's behavior. For the first time since our childhood, Emma seemed to be demonstrating genuine self-awareness and accountability for her actions. However, the letter also included a request that I was not prepared to grant. Emma asked if I would be willing to provide a character reference or employment recommendation that might help her find work when she was released from jail. She suggested that a letter from someone in my position would carry significant weight with potential employers and might help her rebuild her life on a more honest foundation. I consulted with David and with the therapist we had worked with during our marriage counseling about how to respond to Emma's request. The consensus was that while Emma's apparent progress was encouraging, providing professional references would be inappropriate given the extent of her previous manipulation and the ongoing need to maintain boundaries that protected our family. Wrote back to Emma explaining that while I was glad to hear about her educational progress and therapeutic work, I could not provide employment recommendations given our history and my responsibilities to potential employers who would rely on my professional judgment. I encouraged her to continue with counseling and to build references through the programs and relationships she was developing independently. Emma's response to my refusal was mature and understanding, a significant change from her previous pattern of becoming hostile when her requests were denied. She thanked me for considering her situation and acknowledged that rebuilding trust would require demonstrating sustained positive behavior over time rather than expecting immediate forgiveness or assistance. The exchange gave me hope that Emma might finally be developing the self-awareness and personal responsibility that would allow her to build a stable, honest life when she was released. While I had no intention of resuming a personal relationship with her, her apparent progress suggested that she might finally be breaking the cycle of manipulation and self-destruction that had characterized her adult life. Emma was released from jail 4 months ago, and according to information I received through our parents, she has been living in a transitional housing program and working at an entry-level administrative position with a nonprofit organization that provides services to formerly incarcerated individuals. Her social media presence has disappeared entirely, and she appears to be focused on building practical life skills rather than maintaining the carefully curated image that had previously defined her identity. The contrast between Emma's current situation and the lifestyle she had been so desperate to maintain 3 years ago serves as a powerful reminder about the difference between authentic success and superficial status. The expensive apartment, designer clothes, and exclusive social events that had seemed so important to her had all been built on unsustainable foundations of debt, manipulation, and professional misconduct. Meanwhile, the modest government career that Emma had dismissed as limiting has provided me with financial security, meaningful work, and genuine influence that grows stronger each year. The authentic relationships David and I have built based on shared values and mutual respect have created a foundation for happiness and success that manipulation and image management could never have achieved. Last week brought the most unexpected twist of all. I received a formal invitation to speak at the White House about veteran employment initiatives, an honor that represents the pinnacle of recognition in my field. As I prepared my remarks about integrity in public service, I couldn't help but think about the journey that brought me here. Emma's betrayal, which seemed so devastating at the time, had actually been the catalyst that revealed my true strength and pushed me to achieve heights I might never have reached otherwise. Her attempts to destroy my life had instead forced me to embrace my full potential and build something extraordinary from the ashes of her manipulation. David and I now live in a beautiful home in Arlington, with Hope taking her first steps in the same garden where we host informal gatherings for congressional staff and military families. Our life is everything Emma had claimed was impossible: meaningful, successful, and genuinely fulfilling. Sometimes I wonder if Emma ever thinks about the life she could have had if she had chosen honesty over manipulation, support over sabotage. But those are questions only she can answer now. The girl who once dismissed my military service and government work as limiting would probably be shocked to know that the President of the United States now knows my name. But that's the thing about authentic success. It builds itself on foundations that can't be shaken by jealousy or destroyed by betrayal. Integrity doesn't just win in the end. It creates victories that manipulators can't even imagine. Thank you for listening to my story. If you found it inspiring or helpful, please subscribe to our channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building authentic success. Remember, your character is your destiny. Make sure it's one worth living.